So as Mel said, my name's Ross Kecseg, and I live in Irving, Texas, kind of in the Valley Ranch, Coppell area. And I wanted to thank everyone for coming tonight. Me and my dad also host a show on WBTM.org called The Patriot Voice. So you can go to WBTM.org and you can listen to all of our archive content on there. Again, thanks for the support. Hopefully, I'll try to make this as brief as possible because we have a sister presentation that follows this. And I'm sure you guys are all anxious to find out what the math problem is, but hopefully the purpose of this is you'll learn something new that you've never heard of before, some new information. So hopefully this will be a lot more interesting. The reason why I put this together is because I kind of wanted to share with people some insight that I thought that I gained just from talking to people, learning, reading things, taking in new information about, gaining a better understanding about where our political problems come from that so many of you here are probably concerned about. That's why you come to this Tea Party event. That's why you're involved in activism and trying to do something to make a difference. So I think what will be, hopefully what you'll take away is a better understanding after you hear what I have to say about kind of what I've learned. The purpose of the presentation tonight is hopefully to answer some following questions. First off, how our Republican system of governance has been altered throughout the course of American history. Hopefully this will explain why this is important to understand, especially for someone who's a grassroots activist. And most importantly, that process will hopefully make very clear to you guys what the most effective strategy is going to be if we kind of want to change alter the course and change the direction that our country is heading in that I am concerned about. I'm sure you guys are as well. A lot of what we talk about in politics or in the GOP party or politics in general, these Tea Party events, are the symptoms of the problem. Now I'll get to what I think is the problem in a moment. Of course, we have $16 trillion in debt in the federal government, $122 trillion of unfunded liabilities that they admit the federal government doesn't have the money to pay. A recent article came out and says that between local, state, and federal governments, those entities control about 40% of our property, of our wealth, our GDP. A third of all land is federally owned and controlled. We have endless regulations, 172,000 pages in the Federal Registry. The tax code's over 72,000 pages long. It's always growing. It's never shrinking. Failing government schools, 3,000-page bills that, much like this that was held up earlier, the senators admit, Nancy Pelosi admitted in the House that they don't even read the bills, that we have to pass them first. So aside from that, you can forget even talking about the Constitution because these other things don't even meet the test, a common sense test. So we're all aware of that, right? So what we're told and what we're taught growing up in school is that we live in a republic. We have a Republican form of government. And an aspect of that is that we choose who represents us. We have a representative government, at least in the House, through direct elections, and that those elections are competitive. This is important because all legislation and appropriation for money originates in the House. We have the choice of two parties. Our modern day political system is the Democrat and Republican Party. And within those parties we have primary elections by which we can choose who represents us in each respective party. That all sounds great, right? Of course, this allows us to hold people accountable. This was talked about tonight. It allows us to remove representatives that are ineffective, which in turn allows us to influence public policy, or at least so we think. But aside from the symptoms I talked about earlier of how clearly we're going in a very dangerous direction, the numbers don't really add up. Congress has had less than a 12% approval rating for over a decade. They talk about it all the time. Congress has an 8% approval rating, 10% approval rating. Yet 95% of incumbents, every election cycle of each party get reelected. To cite another example, in the Texas House seats, U.S. House, in this last election cycle in 2010, I should say, 31 of 32 incumbents won re-election. I would argue that a lot of the House members are entrenched, and I'll go into why that is later. For a lot of reasons, which I'm not going to go into this presentation, senators enjoy near lifetime tenure, much like Supreme Court justices. Although they do go through an election process, I would argue that's because of the 17th Amendment in a lot of ways, but that's for a different presentation. I'm going to focus on the House tonight, People's House. So my question is, if we're really choosing who represents us, how can 95% of incumbents get reelected when the most basic polls say that they disapprove with what Congress is doing? And if we don't approve of what they're doing, like I said, another way of asking the question is, why aren't they losing? How do they get reelected every single time?
Nobody's running against them.
So of course we can't elect the same people and expect different results. That's the logical conclusion everyone comes to. Well, one of the reasons is gerrymandering. This is a concept that most of us are probably familiar with. This is a U.S. House district in Illinois. And you can see how absurd the lines are. It looks like someone threw up on the sidewalk, as I always like to say. And so the thing that comes to my mind, I don't know if this comes to your mind, is are we really choosing them, or are they really choosing us? Are they going through each precinct and picking out which one is going to be biased towards their party? And it becomes clear that they're really choosing us. Here's one of the worst ones in Texas. Now, this isn't the most recent. It doesn't matter. Okay, the lines may change, but this concept is a permanent cornerstone of our political system now. So what does this mean? What it means is that the general election, in most cases, unless the district is a 50-50, very close Democrat-Republican, the outcome is mostly predetermined. Now, you can argue that on ones that are really close, turnout matters, and it does. The Wall Street Journal did an article and showed that only, at best, 12 districts out of 435 are really competitive from a gerrymandering standpoint. And I would argue this is intentional. It doesn't really matter if it's intentional or not. Clearly it's intentional because they're drawing the lines, but this really serves, the purpose of this is to create the illusion that we have a choice. You know, we go through the motions of the election, but what's the mathematical chance that anyone has at defeating an incumbent in the opposite party? In my district, Kenny Marchant's the congressman in Texas 24, I was having a conversation with him, and he actually referred to his district as a, quote, 64. So what does that mean? And of course they know the numbers, right? They know the math in their district. I guarantee you that. That means that 64% of registered voters or people likely to vote are Republican. So if we have pretty much the same turnout, the same proportion of people go to the polls, just simply show up and vote straight party, which we know most people do, he really has no chance of losing to a Democrat, ever, unless those numbers get closer in line. He also referred to his district as a safe district, meaning he's safe. It's not going to be a contested seat. So my question would be, who's benefiting from this? Who benefits from gerrymandering? Well, the incumbent benefits, right? So, you know, I always make the joke as, you know, who really feels like donating to that campaign? Yet every election cycle, they go around to all these dinners, raising money for the party, raising money for the national party, so on and so forth. And to me, and based on clear evidence, it's a dog and pony show, the general election in many cases. So then, of course, the next question becomes, well, Ross, what about the primary? Someone earlier said we have primaries. Well, if you look at that 2010 election cycle in Texas, I looked at all the House races where there was a challenger facing an incumbent, okay? And there was a lot more challengers than what I thought. Of course, Texas is a huge state. The best someone did against an incumbent was actually in my district. So this is very personal for me. And the best a challenger did in the primary was 32%. That was the closest race for a sitting incumbent, okay? Now, I don't know about you, but I don't consider losing 2-1 a close race. And politically, that's a landslide. If a presidential election went 2-1, they would stop recording the precincts at 15% because they know that mathematically it's nearly impossible to win at that point. And if you notice, I always make the point, me and my dad do, that Ted Cruz ran for an open seat. Now, of course, that's the Senate. And the question is, well, why did he do that? And why did all those other candidates do that? Because in a state as big as Texas, it's pretty hard to defeat a sitting incumbent in your own party in the primary. Politically, it's taboo. You know, in my district, where we did have this challenger, there was only one GOP group that actually hosted a debate between the candidates. Because, of course, it's taboo to challenge someone in your own party, right? When they already have the seat, we're told, well, don't worry about that. That's Republican, right? Or that's Democrat. Let's focus on the other seats we have to go get. Again, who benefits from this? Who's the beneficiary from all these things I'm talking about? It's the incumbents. It's not
the party.
Okay. Thank you. So, who is able to compete in these elections? Well, people who are extremely wealthy, personal wealth, net worths of hundreds of millions of dollars that can finance their own campaign is what I'm getting at. People who are politically connected, and again, I'm talking about House seats. Individuals with special interest support. So, is all this sounding familiar? Is that not the majority of candidates we have that are in office to choose from? And so, we have career politicians and not citizen candidates. I think we all recognize that. And you're probably wondering, yeah, I know all this, that's great. But the question I asked myself when going through this in my mind is, what produces these circumstances? What's responsible for this? And the simple answer is, it's the size of the district. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this concept. And when I'm talking about size, I mean the population. If you go back in history and you do some math, some simple math, you can see that the House districts are 23 times larger in population today than they were in 1789. And it's in the Constitution that this district started out, every representative was representing 30,000 in population. Now the districts are over 700,000 people on average. And increasing. They increase every year because the Congress capped the number of representatives that were in the House during the Progressive era, which I'll get to in a minute. So this wasn't always the case. The size of the House in terms of the number of representatives grew over time. So the average district is now bigger than the state of Wyoming. And there are 7 states now that have 1 representative. Remember, every state has 2 senators, but there's 7 states now because of this that only have 1 representative. So why does this matter? Why am I making this big deal about district size? Well, of course, government is best when closest to the people. We're talking about involvement in city government, county government, state government. Well, politicians and people are self-interested. This is just a feature of human nature. And so they're not going to hold themselves accountable. One of the founders said that the Constitution isn't going to protect itself. Okay, it's going to require vigilance on the part of the citizenry to hold officials accountable and to defend your own rights. Simply put, smaller districts make reps more accountable because, number one, they're going to more closely represent the sentiments of the people in their district. They're easier to influence, they're easier to challenge, and most importantly, they're easier to remove. We can't expect people to be accountable if they cannot be fired. Can you imagine running a corporation where you couldn't fire any of the employees? Ever? I mean, that's how a lot of the public school system is, right? You have to go through a 2-year process, spend all these legal fees just to fire a teacher. And look what we get, on average. Of course, there's some great teachers in great school districts, but we get a dysfunctional system. Just think about, local versus state versus federal governments. We can more easily influence that which is closest to us. And again, who benefits from large districts? It's clearly not the constituency. So I want to show you an illustration real quick that I think is going to drive this point home. This is a map of the original 13 states when the Constitution was ratified. There was 1 representative for every 30,000 people. Now I know this might be hard to see, but I've actually put the number of representatives there were in each state. For example, Connecticut had 5 House members. Virginia had 10. Virginia was a huge territory at the time. So there were 65 members across 13 states when the Constitution was ratified. Shortly thereafter, it depends exactly what year you're talking about, but there was approximately 65 members. Well, the question then becomes, as I said earlier, I guess I should take a step back. In 1929, just before the next census was going to take place, Congress passed a law that capped the House at 435 people. I had never come across this before. I've never learned about this in any history class, read it in any book. And again, this was during the Progressive Movement. This was shortly after the 16th Amendment, which gave the government unlimited taxing authority. Then the 17th, which changed the way the senators were elected, and now this. So by 2010, our congressional districts were 23 times larger than they were when the country was founded. And if you want to see what the effect of this, if you want to conceptualize this, if we had the representation we had back then that we have today, if you take our political system, the size of our districts, and superimpose it on the country when the Constitution was ratified, instead of 65 House members, there would have only been 4 members in the House.
Say that again?
If you take our political system today, the size of our congressional districts that are 700,000 people, and superimpose it on the nation as a hypothetical when the Constitution was ratified, instead of having 65 representatives in the House, we would have had 4.
For 13 states.
So this is the representation that we have today. And everyone wonders why we have the debt. They wonder why the incumbency rate is so high. They wonder why they don't feel their representatives are accountable. So I would argue this is a move away from a republic, even though we still have elections, to a tyranny. That's why I noticed that I used a depiction of kings in that. And this has resulted in longer tenure in office. And I'll show a mathematical illustration of this in a minute, but it makes logical sense. Everyone talks about term limits, so we should have term limits. Well, having term limits would be great. It would force the people in office to retire, but they'd be replaced by people with different names, but the same type of people, and with very little accountability. So it wouldn't change the structural problem we have of the size of our congressional districts. As evidence right here, from 1789 to almost 1929, the average tenure of a congressman was 4 years, and now it's over 15 years and increasing. There's a direct correlation between the size of the district and the average tenure in office if you look at the numbers. So, of course, if we have the incumbents entrenched, if they know they can't be defeated, they play all the political rhetoric on the radio, on the television, but ultimately they're unaccountable. So we have control by special interest groups, by the political elite, and I think one of the biggest tragedies of this political system is that people no longer pay attention to state politics, because the importance of state politics has been marginalized in so many ways. Everyone looks to the federal government. Everyone looks at the presidential race. And so I'm going to get to why I think that's a mistake. So again, if you go back to the 4 versus the 65, you can see that, would each of these people have more or less power? Would they be easier or more difficult to remove? Would they be more or less accountable than the 65? So you start to understand how bad it's gotten and why we have so many outrageous problems. I just want to make one other point. If you look at all the expansions of the federal government, most of the creation of the cabinet level departments, if you look at the amount of spending the federal government, all these coincide with when they cap the House. Some of it's due to the 16th Amendment, some of it's due to the 17th. But our nation fundamentally changed when we replaced 65 people with 4 kings, which is the way I characterize our political system. Hold on. Oh, go ahead. Go
How
ahead.
does the math go the other way? So you
How many
down
represent?
to 4, what if we had 30,000 per now?
Yeah, and we'd have 10,000
10,000
10,000 representatives, but of course, you got to remember that over time, the size of the district did grow. And let me jump to this next chart so I can show you what I'm talking about. I know you guys probably are going to have difficulty seeing this, but I do want to just take one moment to point this out because I have about 5 minutes left. This chart shows the size of the congressional district and population, and it has a number of years over here in terms of tenure, average tenure of a House member. These are the years. This is 1790 something to 2003, so it doesn't even go to present day. This chart here shows the average population of each congressional district. it remains relatively flat, under 200,000 people, but it is increasing. So it wasn't always 30,000. The size of the districts grew, but very slowly. After this point here is when the House was capped, okay? Now this dot here is the average tenure in office of each House, and it goes here that, this is the 3rd, 8th, 13th Congress, 108th Congress. So that's plotted here, and of course that corresponds to the year. Now you can see that this, if you take the average of all these data points, it's approximately just under to just over 4 years. Now after they cap the size of the House, you see the pretty sharp rise in the population from 200,000 now to 700,000 people, and you see the rise in tenure. The correlation coefficient here is 0.92%. Now I work in analytics, and that's about as close as you can get to a direct correlation. I mean, it's not causation. Okay? There's a difference between causation and correlation, but this is pretty convincing to me, just if you want to look at some empirical evidence. And again, you got to remember that this won't change. We will forever have 435 people so long as that statute is never amended or adjusted or repealed or changed. So this problem will only get worse. If we add 50 million people to the country in the next 15 years, the districts are going to be 800,000, 900,000, 1 million people. Just think how powerful those congressmen are going to be. Way more powerful than they are now. So it's kind of frightening. Now, again, I want to summarize this. I only have about a few minutes left. Where am I going with all this? I know this kind of sounds depressing. It kind of sounds daunting. Well, you guys are used to depressing news because you're paying attention to what's going on. So I would argue what we really have is an oligarchy, okay, where we have this noble class, political elite. Now, I'm not vilifying everyone that's in public office. Of course, you cannot generalize and sweep everyone in the same category. But we certainly don't have a healthy republic. And by that I mean we're not really choosing who represents us. And the evidence is clear of that. So competitive elections are the exception, not the rule. The size of House districts, I would argue, is the primary cause. The same people are giving us the same results. And I just always mention, I don't think term limits would really be as effective as changing the size of the districts because it wouldn't change the structural problem. And from a pragmatic standpoint, I like to point out that why do politicians always say they're in favor of term limits, passing an amendment? Because it's a very arduous process, and it won't happen, right? So they love supporting things that won't happen. It's like, I love a balanced budget amendment, because it'll never pass. And I can run around saying that, I support that, and everyone thinks I'm conservative, and that's great, and I get reelected. All this would take to change is a piece of legislation. Now, of course, the next question is, well, why would anyone pass a piece of legislation that would make it easier for people to fire them? They won't. But, so you can forget about term limits, is kind of my point. Why would they why would they support ratifying a constitutional amendment? So, here's what I'm getting at. Long-term and short-term solutions. I like to encourage people long-term to don't spend all of your time obsessing about all these little problems, these issues that we have. Are they important? Of course. If you can do something to change it, great. But I think it's important, and it's a little bit of a relief to me to feel like I better understand what the source, what the root cause of the problem is. Because if you don't know what that is, you're certainly not going to be able to change that. And again, simple legislation would fix this. Now, if I was running for office, that would be my campaign slogan. I'm going to make it easier for you to fire me. What incumbent's going to say that?
You mean when you're running?
No. So, questions? Wait, questions afterwards. Don't interrupt.
Statement.
Oops, you got me. So, more importantly, what is the short-term solution? Don't ignore federal politics. I'm not trying to discourage anyone from paying attention to that stuff, but we certainly should prioritize our efforts as activists, and we need to attack on where we can affect change. Now, based on my analysis, where can we affect change? Local, more importantly, state politics, because our state districts, House districts in Texas, are a third of the size. Okay? So let's assume we never change the size of the House and they keep running us off a cliff. Fine. you have a much better likelihood of influencing your representative and throwing that person out and supporting the challenger. And the turnover of the seats are evidence of that. The state House seats turn over a lot more frequently than do the US House seats. So I want to encourage everyone, aside from your local government, stuff that's going on in the county, instead of obsessing and feeling hopeless that we can't change the federal government, I would encourage you to focus on the state House districts. I think that's where we can really make a big dent. And I don't know if anyone's questioning any of your state representatives in public forums, but many of them are not as conservative as people think they are. Okay, so I'll just pop that balloon for you guys right now. Don't hold your breath. I would argue that we need to support nullification and state interposition movements. There's one going on in Texas right now. This is why this next presentation is going to be important, because it's going to touch on that subject. Thomas Jefferson referred to this as the rightful remedy. And if you don't remember anything tonight about the math problem, I just would like to urge you to remember that if we lose the state of Texas to the left, and by the left, you know who I'm talking about, the progressives, we will lose the national war, because the state of Texas is the last government that can really stand in the way of federal tyranny and constitutional overreach on the part of the federal government. So thank you for having me here tonight. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll take a couple questions and then we'll go on to the next presentation. So.